Hey everyone, Susan Beatty here with a video related to Kentucky Academic Standards for Science. I thought I would take some of the things that we learned this summer at some of our trainings and break them up into smaller little segments that might be meaningful to someone. This one is going to be focused on what matters to me for lesson planning related to the standards. Standards can sometimes be overwhelming, particularly for new teachers trying to figure out a new grade level or a new content area. And so just really drilling down and focusing on the part of the standard that can really make the difference in your lesson planning can kind of be helpful. So I want to focus on that here in this really short video. I'm going to turn my camera off so that nothing on the screen is covered up by my picture, but just know that I'm still with you. Okay, so what matters to me? Just a little bit about the Kentucky Academic Standards for Science. I did an overview session this summer for new science teachers. If you'd like a longer overview, there is a video of that close to this one, so seek that out. You can also go to kaystandards.org and find some longer modules and some other things that might be helpful to you. I've listed all of the documents that I'm going to reference here on this page, so if you're interested in checking out that bit.ly or that QR code, it will give you the links to the information that I'm going to share with you here. Nothing that I've created, it's all stuff that's on our state website or other national standards websites. So the focus today in this video is to what does it mean and what should we keep in mind? We need to keep in mind really what the standards are, what students should know and be able to do, and then where our assessment questions come from. That's what matters to us, really, is the purpose of the standards, why we have them, and what we use them for. So to understand that these standards are a little different from standards that we've had in the past, actually not a little, but quite a bit different than the standards we've had in the past. They are a coherent progression of knowledge of big ideas, starting in the lower grades and progressing all the way through high school. We have smaller amounts of content in these standards. Like I said, big ideas, not a lot of detail, but more inclusion of the practices and also the concepts that tie everything together. We'll look at that here in just a moment. The three dimensions, if you remember, what students do are the practices, what students know are the content ideas, and then how students think are those cross-cutting concepts, all of those woven together to make up the performance expectations that students are assessed on. So I want you to think about as we go through these parts here that I'm getting ready to point out to you is how will you incorporate the three dimensions into your instruction? Not just one, not just the content, not just the practice, but all three together. How can you be mindful of that as you plan lessons from day to day? Because as we've said, the KAS in science look completely different than the standards before, which require us to shift how and what we do in our instruction, and then how students learn from that instruction. So we're talking about standards that are practice-driven with big idea content connected together with science concepts that make learning more in context, more meaningful, more authentic, more real life, so that students can apply higher level thinking skills to solve problems and then transfer the learning they do in that to other authentic uses for everyday life, or a test question or two, or a test cluster or two as they experience that assessment. They are written as performance expectations. This slide I got from KDE's standards presentation. It just shows you an example of what a performance expectation looks like. I'm sure you've all been aware of that. Just know that each one has a code, and that code means something. This is what a standards page looks like now. This is very cleaned up from the way it was originally when the standards were first released. And so I think they're much better than they used to be, with one PE per page and those three dimensions laid out there for each one of those. So what I want to get to here and focus the rest of our time on is what parts of the standards pages are really most important for teachers to pay attention to as you're planning your lessons, as you're thinking about your big units, and then as you're making assessments. What are the things that I need to focus in on? What are the things I need to make sure students are engaging in? How can I provide activities and experiences for them to really bring out what matters in the standards so that in the end they can meet those performance expectations? Well, I would argue that the information in these foundation boxes, the colored columns on your standards pages, are where you're going to get the best information to plan those lessons. Because if you look, the disciplinary core idea tells you what big ideas in science do students need to put together? What do they need to figure out about that? In this particular one, it's about waves. And it very clearly tells you with wave properties what it is they need to experience. What is it they need to be able to explain? So when they're making models or they're doing investigations or they're describing or explaining or arguing, these are the kinds of things we want to bring out. These are the kinds of things we want them to figure out so that we know that they can put it all together. Using models, identifying patterns, all of those things together are the things that we need to clue in on and make sure students are able to do. So if we look at a standard related to waves, this is the 4th grade example. You can see the 3 dimensions laid out there. That doesn't mean you have to give them this exact task to do. That would be quite daunting. It's hard to give them a lesson that gets them to do this. Instead, it's probably going to be a series of lessons put together that when they figure out all of those little things in those lessons, they can put it all together and then complete this with all that they've learned individual days. They can only absorb so much information at once, and so you have to build. So let's look at each of these individually and see what matters about these. The disciplinary core ideas, remember, are those life science, physical science, or space science ideas that we want to focus in on. And there are 11 sub-ideas and then 39 really, really more detailed ideas that are really going to tell us what it is specifically we need to listen for. And so what I want you to look at when you're looking at your standards document, trying to make sense, particularly for the DCI, is look at the orange column and look what is in those elements. The elements are the text there underneath of the code. The specific things that students should be able to explain as a result of their learning. Really dig into that and try to understand what that means and what that looks like, and how you can design learning experiences using the practices to help them dig into those and figure out those things. Each core idea can have several elements, and these elements build over time. You're not going to teach them every element and involve every element in every lesson or even in every standard. But if they experience some of the elements, they build over time and they become more complex in later grades, and they become more doable the more experience they have with those elements. And so if you know what happens from grade to grade, it kind of helps you. So if you look at your appendices, Appendix E is the one that takes the DCIs and breaks them down by grade band. And so you can see if you're a 4th grade teacher teaching about waves, you know what you're supposed to teach. But do you know what they should have gotten in K through 2? And do you know what they're going to get in 6 through 8? And where do you fit in that whole coherent sequence? This is a resource that might be helpful to help you understand that. So here I've pulled out from that document the example of waves. And in 1st grade, students are going to learn about sound and vibration. In 4th grade, then they're going to learn that waves travel in water, can be different sizes, and they make objects move. And they bring in those 2 words, amplitude and wavelength. In 7th grade, students are going to learn that waves can be seen in light and sound and can be changed in size, and some need a medium. And they bring in that word frequency. And then in high school physics, they're going to learn more about those terms in different kinds of waves, different kinds of speeds. They add more complexity to it. And then start talking about how waves can be used to transfer information. So you can see how it progresses from 1st to 4th to 7th to high school. Students are learning about waves all the way through. The next dimension are the practices, and these are the 8 practices. I know we're all familiar with those. Focusing in on 1 or 2 practices is important in terms of getting students to really drive their learning by doing something. And if you can get them to do some of these practices in your lessons, depending on what the context is, really helps them figure out on their own more so than you just telling them the information. So if we look at our standards document, we're going to focus on the blue column, and we're going to see for this particular standard we're investigating, this one is about models, developing and using models. Again, there are elements within that practice that students should learn to do. And for this one, we're learning to develop a model using analogies, examples, or abstract representations so that they can describe a scientific principle, and in this case, the scientific principle are properties of waves. And again, the elements build over time. Students learn to do one part in a previous grade and then become more skilled and complex in that skill in later grades. Appendix F is the support document for that. If you want to see how students progress through the practice of modeling from K through 2 to high school, you can see all of the different elements there. Notice that you don't use every element in every standard. So if you look there at the 3 through 5, the second bullet down there below in that last row is the one that's focused on in that particular standard. Develop a model using an analogy, example, or abstract representation. There are others that are possible ones that could be found in other standards, but that's the one that goes particularly with this one. But just knowing that there are other elements and that elements are built from grade to grade is sometimes helpful. So in the example of waves and developing and using models from 1st to 4th to 7th to physics, you can see there how students do different things with modeling, and the modeling gets more complex as they go through. They're going to focus on sound in 1st grade, make their own models of sound. Then in 4th grade, they're going to use different models with different types of media and be able to explain those. And then in 7th grade, they're going to manipulate variables and make predictions about what happens to waves in different conditions. And then in physics, they look at different system models and compare different types of models and the components of the waves. So you can see how it gets more complex from grade level to grade level, just like it did with the content. And lastly, the cross-cutting concepts are those big unifying themes that are throughout all science ideas. And so we're going to look at one of these in our example, but you can see that they're big, huge concepts that we can probably describe in lots of different science areas. And so this is always the green column in your standards document, the cross-cutting concepts. In this particular example, we're going to look at patterns. Students should use the concept of patterns to make connections across waves, between different kinds of waves and different kinds of settings and different kinds of contexts, looking for similarities in waves in one place and differences in waves in another, in order to explain different kinds of natural phenomena that might involve some type of wave motion. So here again, building over time, patterns get more complex as students learn from grade to grade. Appendix G is the support document that helps understand cross-cutting concepts. So if we look at the patterns row up there, we can see that K through 2, patterns in the natural and human design world can be observed and used to describe phenomena and used as evidence. So it's very basic. And then as you go from 3 to 5 to 6 to 8, you can see we add more elements when we get to high school. Patterns get more complex, and the student's ability to identify them and compare them should also get more complex using evidence. We're always going to add evidence in when we're looking for patterns. So here we can see how 1st grade, 4th grade, 7th grade to physics, just like we did with the others, the ability to look for and observe patterns changes, gets more complex, and students just get better at it the more experience they have. They should be really good with patterns by the time they get to physics if they've had this experience in the other grade bands. The last document that I will refer you to if you're still struggling with understanding your standard and what it really means and what part's important and what you should focus on is give the evidence statements a look. If you just Google NGSS evidence statements, you'll find those. They just give you a little bit more detail about students, what they should know and be able to do related to that particular standard. It might give you even some hints or some ideas of some activities that you might employ to get students to describe and explain and really understand the content and use the practice in a different way. So to finish this up, we need to make sure that students have a guaranteed and viable curriculum that's aligned to their standards. So an understanding of the what is critical to make the curriculum, which is the how, come together with it. So again, I encourage you to focus on the elements in the 3 columns for your standards. If you're getting ready to start a new unit, go and look at the standards that are found in that unit and really study those 3 columns and see if you can understand them yourself so that you can design better, more robust activities that really get students to draw those things out. Focus on the elements that students need to encounter in order to learn about the core ideas, experience the practices, and think about concepts, because that's what the learning should be. So a strong understanding of the standards is important. The what, to help students make sense of what they need to learn and to know and be able to do as a result of their experience in your class. The curriculum, the how, that just comes together with a foundation of the standards being built. That helps you choose the kind of instructional model that you want to use to deliver the content so that students can grasp it and figure it out. Using your knowledge, using your skills, using your past experience, your creativity as a teacher to make that curriculum work, but always remember to use and embed it with a high quality instructional resource. What makes a science what makes a science resource high quality is alignment to standards, is that it is applicable and scaffolded for all students. It does have a lot of strategies and routines built in that help encourage those higher level thinking and problem solving skills and get students to really think deeper about what it is they're trying to explain. Built in for you. So I encourage you really to seek out a high quality instructional resource, even though it's new, even though it's different. Give it a chance because it will give you it will help you with that shift in mindset that we really need to have. And then don't leave out your other supplemental resources that you love to use as well. I hope this was helpful. If you have questions about any of this, please reach out to me. I'll be glad to help anyone. And I hope you have a good experience learning more and using the standards in a better way. Thanks.